let's get to the question. Somebody was asking what they can do for all over joint pain. And well, I can tell you what I know. I mean, I don't get all over joint pain, but mostly my joint pain is going to be in my neck and my back. Same with Patrick. And my knees, especially after I injured my knee a couple of years ago pretty badly. I tore my ACL. So I did take some time to link to several videos in the description down below. So don't forget to click on ... more or more ... whatever it is. And you'll be able to find those links. So one link is my newer version of my infused oil for the joint and muscle rub. Now, I know this person was asking specifically for all over joint pain. This is something you're actually going to rub onto the affected areas. So this is going to be joint and muscles. And so I started creating this, developing it back when I was still teaching dance and martial arts. And, you know, you're always pulling a muscle, spraining a toe, a finger, a wrist, or an ankle. You know, it's always happening when you're active like that. So, I didn't want to depend on icy hot and all that stuff. I wanted to make my own, because I wanted it to be all natural. And I basically just started off taking coconut oil and cayenne pepper, and then adding a couple of essential oils. And then I've developed that over time. Now, I still changed it even more since that video. And one of the things I do now is I think it's a 50-50 blend of the avocado oil and castor oil. And the reason castor oil is because castor oil is also, just on its own, is very good for helping with sprains and breaks and muscle and joint and all that. I know a lot of people that just simply use castor oil. Like if they're arthritic in their hands, they'll just simply rub castor oil and they say it really works well for them. So the reason I don't infuse with castor oil alone is because it has such a high viscosity. I get concerned it's not going to infuse as good as it could. Usually the thicker something is, the harder it's going to be for it to really infuse well. So that's why I do a 50-50 blend. Then I have another video down there. It's an older video it's the joint and muscle rub, but it is, well, it's kind of older. It was one of those I had to edit and re-put up because of a certain substance I do use in it that I can't talk about on YouTube. But that one is the infused oil, showing me adding different essential oils and giving different suggestions for essential oils. You can add 1, 2, none at all. It's going to be entirely up to you. So you need to know what essential oils you can and cannot use, what you're going to be sensitive to. And I usually add quite a bit, and we love it. Patrick did something to his back yesterday. He was bending over to pick up the grandbaby, and he didn't pick him up. It was just, he moved funny and something in his back is pinched. So, last night I rubbed some in his back, and I'll do it again today. And that has helped him quite a bit when I'm able to do that. So that's those. Then there's, I think, 2 other links I put in there. I put 2 links to a couple of different tinctures. One of them is for specifically to help relax the muscles. And it does have pain relieving qualities to it because of the valerian that I use in there. I use valerian root in that particular one. And it also helps with sleep. That might be helpful for someone who's dealing with a lot of pain and needs to sleep, or just maybe it's because your muscles are so tight. Valerian root is excellent if you can handle it to relax really, really tense muscles. Sometimes that's all it is. Now, then I also have a tincture that is for pain and inflammation in particular. And I also have that linked down below, because inflammation does also cause pain, as a lot of us know. I mean, there's different types of pain. So a lot of your herbs, your pain and inflammation herbs, I mean, they do both. They help to relieve pain and inflammation. Sometimes just relieving the inflammation alone can help with pain, but not always. Sometimes the pain is caused from something else. So that's why it's great that herbs, a lot of your pain relieving herbs, are also naturally good at relieving the inflammation and lowering that down. to take that pressure off of whatever it is. So then a question actually came in today because of the video that published this morning. That was a remastered video of Patrick making a wooden bowl out of some burl. He makes some really beautiful bowls. I have a lot of his stuff. Now, right now, no, he's not making the bowls to sell. It takes quite a bit of material. If you watch that video, you'll realize, I mean, it's like this chunk, but you're taking a lot of wood out of there, and it's a lot of work and a lot of time that goes into it. But what the question somebody asked, I thought was a really great question, was, what do you do with the wood shavings? Sometimes they pile up in his shop for a long time. You can end up with a huge pile of wood shavings, but we do use them. We do recycle them. So several things that I use them for is this time of year when it's this wet. I mean, it's just pouring down rain out there like normal, like it normally does in the winter. It's wet and windy, wet and windy, wet, wet, wet and windy, and then more wet. And so when you got a backyard full of chickens walking around, you know, certain paths, because you got a lot of these garden areas, and you're walking around in these same paths. I mean, we have some grading down in some areas, but we still don't have enough yet to cover all of the areas that get super muddy and nasty, and the dogs walk through them and track all the mud in the house because they don't wear shoes that they can slip off outside the door like I do. I wish I could get them to do that. But at any rate, when it gets really, really bad, I'll a lot of times just take some of that buckets of that sawdust or wood shavings and just spread them in the muddiest areas. And that helps a lot there. Some of the stuff gets used in the chicken coop as bedding, and a lot of it gets used in the garden areas. Just depending on what kind of wood. You got to be careful with black walnut. It can really stunt the growth of plants or just kill them altogether. So you got to be careful with black walnut. Some things, some certain types. So I covered the three main things I use them for. And then another thing they get used for sometimes is we'll have like old candles that we picked up at garage sales, especially like the ugly ones or whatever. And Patrick will melt down the wax and then take his wood shavings and he makes these little fire starting pucks out of those. And they work really, really well. I especially like using them when I'm using the rocket stove outside. They work really good and they burn like, I guess it depends on, he's cut them like this thick and he's cut them this thick. The thick ones can burn for like 15 minutes. I think we timed it out. I could be wrong. It might say in his video. And then somebody did ask, I know a lot of you already know, but somebody did ask what grain mill I have. Now my grain mill is the Country Living grain mill. I want to say it's cast iron, painted cast iron, I think. It's very heavy. It's built like a tank. It's made here in Washington State, so made in the U.S. I love it. I love the fact that it's got a big wheel on it and I can grind by hand, which is what I did for like the first year I had it until Patrick built me. He took an old motor. He can probably tell you in the chat since he's here. He took an old motor and rebuilt it and cleaned it up and then set it up so that I can use power and run it off electricity, be it solar or public power, which saves so much time. I can grind up the flour I need to make a loaf of bread in a few minutes when I can run it off power. When you're doing it by hand, it depends on the grains you use, but it can take 15 minutes to an hour, depending on the grains, to grind up 1 cup of flour. It takes a long time. What I used to do is just grind, and switch positions. I have an old video where I explain how I do it. Then I'd switch arms. And I do overhand and underhand. So I was working all my muscles on my arms. And that was great. And then I'd go do something else and come back and and I'd always count how many rotations. And then, that's how I was doing it. But it takes a lot of time. And once I started my channel, things got busier and busier. I was finding I had less and less time for that. So the motor's great. I just turn it on and let it grind up my flour, come back and check it, make sure it's not overflowing my container. And it's good. But here's the thing about the Country Living grain mill. is that I will say when I think we got it in 2013, between 2013 and 2015. I don't remember. It was around in there. I know it was before I started my channel. And it was almost half the price it is now. It's a very expensive. I mean, everything's gone up in price. It is built like a tank. I believe it's definitely worth the price we paid for it. But one of the reasons I don't talk about it a lot is just because it is so expensive. And I'm not going to try to push an expensive product like that on people when there's other types of grain mills out there you can get. Are they as good as the one I have? I wouldn't know because I don't have that, but I know there's plenty of people out there that have various different types of grain mills. I do recommend getting one that can run off electricity because it will save you a lot of time, but it would also be good if you had one that you could run by hand or at least had a backup power source for it. But that's why I wanted this particular one, because I knew I could use it either way. So yeah. And like I say, I love it. I recommend it for its quality and just how it's set up. And you can get different augers for it. Like when I bought mine, it came with the corn and bean auger. And then you can also get a peanut butter auger for it. You just change it out. And you can adjust how fine or coarse you want your flour. But I know that Jamie from American Homestead, I don't know if Zach still uses it. I'm assuming maybe he does, but she had a Wonder Mill, and I think they just ran it off solar power, and she loved that. And I think a local lady that grinds a lot of her own flour, I think hers is a Wonder Mill, and it's something like that. And it only takes a few minutes for her to grind what she needs. Just turn it on and let it go. Someone asked, because I was talking about how we use grass clipping as in our gardens. Mostly it's something I will lay on top of the areas. After everything's planted, everything's growing, then I'll lay the grass clippings on top because it helps hold in moisture, and as it breaks down, it feeds the soil. And I'll just, especially over like potatoes, it's great. And we'll just keep piling them over the potato plants. The potatoes grow, pile some more on top. They love that. Now, someone asked this really good question is, do you worry about what are the chances of you getting a bunch of weed seed in there? Well, the chances are probably pretty good. It depends on the lawn or whatever you're getting it from. Now, since ours is totally organic, we don't use any chemicals and spray to keep the weeds back out on our piece down the road where we bring most of the grass clippings over from. The only thing that's grows in there besides grass are dandelions. I don't care about that because I grow dandelions and I let them come up where they want in my garden areas. Well, most of the time. If it gets too thick with them, I'll thin them out. I mean, I do have certain places I specifically like them to grow because they can get really big, massive leaves and all that. But I'm not worried about that. And especially where the soil is loose and I don't want them, they just pull right up. It's easy. It's really easy. And so I don't worry about it. But that is definitely a good question and something to consider before you start layering grass clippings on your garden. You could end up with plants you didn't want. Most of the weeds that came over to my garden came from the horse manure that we used to get. But the horses that were down the road are no longer there. That's why we haven't been getting horse manure. And but I ended up with some medicinal herbs that I otherwise did not have before. So there you go. As a result, somebody had asked if it's okay to mix herbs. The answer, generally speaking, is yes, but it's going to depend on the herbs. It's going to depend on you. It's going to depend on whether or not you can even have those herbs or if you can have those herbs together. So it really boils down to you doing your own research and finding out what herbs are best for you first, trying the herbs of one at a time. Don't mix them until you try them first, especially if you're one that's prone to allergies or having reactions to various things, or if you're on medications of any kind. Always be careful, always do your own research. This is why I have a video out on how to do your own research. explaining, because to me, it just seems, I always forget that it took me a lot of practice to figure out how to look things up, years of practice. And so I cover that in that video, and how you research it is going to depend on you, because your health issues, the medications you're on, so on and so forth. But I just wanted to say, generally speaking, yes, you can. I mix herbs all the time and don't do all that research, but I don't have all these allergies and I'm not on medications of any kind. So it's just, I don't worry about it. I probably should worry about it more than I do, but I've never had issues. So question, a majority of my yard is shaded by trees. What fruit, veggies, herbs can I plant to utilize this space? Well, some of it's going to depend on what you're looking at. Now, when we first started our garden areas, I wasn't sure at the time I wanted to get rid of our 15-foot pool, which was at the time right in the middle of the yard. I wasn't sure yet. I wasn't sure I wanted to dedicate the whole backyard to garden. And so I thought, well, let me just start with the areas I know I can use. And so our backyard faces north, and the area right up against the house obviously does not get any direct sun ever, because it's on the north side of the house. But I had heard that potatoes can grow in very little sun. So I tried it, and just to see what would happen. Didn't do anything special with the soil, just threw some potatoes in there, and was surprised. I didn't get a ton of potatoes, but I actually got some pretty good sized potatoes, and I think they were yellows, because those are our favorite. Any kind of yellow potato is our favorite. And they did decently well. Potatoes will do better if they get plenty of wet water and sun. They did okay. I still try to grow them out in the direct where they can get more sun, because they do better and I get more potatoes. But there's that. There's a lot of herbs that will do fine with little sun. Like, a lot of your perennial type herbs, they will still do better if they can, they'll grow more prolifically if they can get more sun, but they'll still grow in little sun. So oregano, thyme, pretty much any of your mints. Well, those are mints too, but your peppermint, your lemon balm, they prefer having some sun, but they will do okay without it. Nettle doesn't need a lot of direct sun. Nettle, in fact, prefers to not have too much hot sun. So if you're wanting to grow nettle, just know that nettle, just like any kind of nettle isn't a mint, but nettle can be similar to mints in the way it can be invasive. So I grow mine in the garden right up against the house. And every season, planting season, it's right where one of my potato patches are. When I'm ready to start putting in my potatoes, I have to go out there and yank up all the stuff that's kind of coming out farther into the garden and kind of push it back to keep it up against the house, so it's not filling up the whole doggone garden area. But I'll do that same thing with peppermint and whatnot if I need to. But for the most part, I don't care if the peppermint grows here, there, and everywhere, because it doesn't, any of the other herbs and so on that it grows amongst, it doesn't hurt it. In fact, it can be helpful because it helps keep pests away. Another one that I got through email yesterday, day before, something like that, was somebody was concerned about their fermentation starter. So some of you who are new might not know what that's about, but you can find the several videos on making a fermentation starter. Your fermentation starter, initially I started making it out of ginger, known as a ginger bug, so I could start making my own homemade mead and eventually wine using that instead of depending on store-bought wine yeast or whatever. And works great. And then I started experimenting with it and saying, can I use this to get anything fermenting? And I found I can, even making homemade bread. So the question on the starter was, she was concerned because it always smells like alcohol, strongly of alcohol, no matter what she does. Well, it will, because there is going to be a certain amount of alcohol in it, because just like vinegar, you get that halfway point in the vinegar 2 weeks in, it should smell pretty strongly of alcohol because of the sugar. So the bacteria and the yeast, they're taking that sugar, they're eating the sugar, and then they're turning it into alcohol. And then the oxygen, if you're making vinegar, this is why you keep a cloth over your jar of vinegar, because it needs the oxygen exposure to then take that alcohol and turn it into acetic acid. But if you're not wanting it to be vinegar, that's why you've got to prevent it from getting oxygen exposure. Thus, the need for an airlock. The airlock, you have water in it, and the water prevents the air from getting in, the oxygen from getting in, but allows the gases to escape so it doesn't blow up. But yes, it will smell like alcohol. What you need to look for is if it's fizzy. If the fermentation starter is fizzy, which usually takes anywhere from 3 to 5 days once you've started it on your counter at room temperature, takes about 3 to 5 days for it to get fizzy. Sometimes it just depends on the produce you're using or how warm the area you're creating it in is. Once it gets to that point, I keep it in the fridge. And then I don't have to feed it on a regular basis. And it stays good in there, and it can stay fizzy like that with a tight lid with a seal in there. So if I'm putting a plastic lid on there, I make sure I prefer to use the plastic, because sometimes with stuff like that that's fermenty, it can start eating through the coating on the on your metal lids and cause them to rust. So that in that case, I do like using plastic with a silicone ring, so it's got a nice tight fit, so there's no oxygen exposure, and as long as it's fizzy, it's still good. So it's still good to use as a starter. If it's lost all its fizziness, you may or may not be able to bring it back to that active stage, but it needs to be in that active stage where it's really fizzy. If it's just a little bit fizzy, you can usually bring it back to a more bubbly active stage by taking it out of your fridge, setting it on your counter, adding a little bit of sugar, letting it get to room temperature, and just keeping your eye on it, because it just needed to be fed. So every time I use a fermentation starter, it gets fed, I get more sugar gets added, water gets added to top it back off. It stays on the counter until the next day, and I make sure it's good and fizzy, put it back in the fridge. And I've used the same fermentation starters without making new ones for over a year. In fact, I still have the same ones in my fridge that I started for the last fermentation starter video I made, which was sometime this last year, and they're still good. How do I use a brake bleeder seal jars? Lucy, I have a whole bunch of videos on my first channel. Just put if you just do a search, rain country vacuum seal, you'll probably find a whole bunch. In fact, if you go to the one that's options for vacuum sealing, that one I know for certain, I'm not only talking about different options you can use for vacuum sealing jars, I demonstrate how to vacuum seal, how to use the brake bleeder and the food saver tops. Good to see you, Tyler. About time. You got your behind in here again. I got to give you a hard time. See, for plastic lids that don't seal well, can you add a bead of food grade silicone? I would assume so. But what I do is you can get, they come in 2 forms. Well, actually 3. You can get the little silicone rings. You can find them on Amazon. Of course, they're all made in China. Anything like that is always made in China, just so you know. But there's a little silicone ring, get wide or regular mouth, and I use those. The ones I like best when it comes to the rings are the ones that have the little lip rather than just being flat. I don't know if you know what I mean, but you can just have a flat ring, or there's the one that has a little lip on each side, on the inner side circle and the outer side circle. Those seal best, and they stay in place better in the lid. Then you can also find, I keep thinking I should get some and try them, some that cover the whole inside of the plastic lid. I think those would probably be best, because they would probably be less likely to fall out and fall in. That tends to happen. You go take something off and the ring falls in. But they also cover the whole top of the plastic lid, and plastic does still can, it's not entirely, it might be leak proof as far as liquid goes, but not necessarily as far as oxygen goes. Oxygen can still get through plastic. It takes a long time, but it's still somewhat permeable. So the silicone may, the solid silicone piece. Terry is in complete control of my behind and what it needs to do next. Well, that's good. And I'm sure she needs to use her foot on it every so often too.